My husband took our daughter to a seaside camp and left me to care for his father, who has been in a coma for 8 years. When the plane took off, my father-in-law suddenly opened his eyes and said those 7 words, and I kicked down the door and ran away. Before we dive into this fascinating story, please tell me what country you're visiting us from. I'm honored to know who's on the air with me now. Enjoy. A July morning descended on the Komarova cottage community with a heavy heat, melting the asphalt of the driveways and drooping the petunias in the ceramic vases arranged along the wrought iron fence. Antonina stood at the open gate of their 3-story house and watched her husband pack the last of his travel bags into the trunk of his black Lexus. Vadim turned, walked over to her, and adjusted the collar of her linen blouse. She'd seen this gesture hundreds of times over the 15 years of their marriage, and each time it seemed to her like a sign of concern. Although his fingers always lingered on the fabric a little longer than necessary, it was as if he weren't adjusting her collar but marking his territory, reminding her and the world to whom she belonged. "Don't turn off the diffuser," he said, lowering his voice to the half-whisper usually reserved for something important and intimate. "Let it run 24/7. That's essential. Remember I showed you that blogger, the naturopath with 3 million subscribers? Ionized air works wonders on lung tissue, especially during prolonged immobilization. 45,000 for a humidifier." She smiled, shaking her head with the indulgent tenderness that wives show toward their husbands' harmless quirks. "You're a spendthrift, Vadim. We'd spare nothing for our father, you know that." It was true. At least Antonina always thought so. For the 8 years that Nikolai Vasilievich lay in his room on the 2nd floor, Vadim didn't skimp on medical equipment, imported medications, and all sorts of new alternative medicine innovations. Sometimes it was a Spanish infusion from the Altai Morel, sometimes some herbal infusions from a shaman from Lake Baikal, and now this ionizing diffuser, the happiness of a person with too much money. That's how she used to explain these expenses to herself. Maya sat in the front passenger seat staring at her phone with the detachment only teenagers can muster. Her wireless headphones stuck out of her ears like 2 white blobs, isolating her from the outside world more reliably than any wall. 14 is the age when a mother becomes an annoying nuisance, a source of lectures and pointless worries. And the father, generous with pocket money and trips to the sea, becomes the center of the universe, the one adult who understands. Antonina waved to her daughter, but she didn't even look up from the screen. "Maya," Vadim called out, his voice laced with that special authority to which his daughter obeyed without question. "Say goodbye to Mom properly." The girl reluctantly took out one earphone, feigned something between a smile and a grimace, muttered something that sounded like "bye," and turned back to the window. Vadim threw up his hands as if to say, "What can you do, teenagers, you know?" and got behind the wheel, slamming the door with a soft, expensive thud. The Lexus pulled away, crunching on the gravel driveway, gliding past the trimmed arborvitaes and out the gate. The wrought iron doors closed behind it with a dull clang, cutting Antonina off from the outside world. She stood for another minute, looking at the empty street as the neighbor's gardener slowly drove down in his electric cart, then turned and walked toward the house. The 3-story cottage towered over manicured lawns and rose beds. Without a car by the porch, without a husband and daughter, it seemed abandoned, uninhabited, like a movie set from which all the actors had been removed and only props were left. The air conditioners hummed inside, dispelling the 30-degree heat outside the panoramic windows. And this mechanical hum now reigned supreme, filling every room and hallway. Antonina went up to her room, changed into a medical gown which, after 8 years of daily use, had become more familiar to her than any dress, and thoroughly washed her hands with sanitizer. She checked her morning routine and climbed the wide oak staircase to the 2nd floor, its steps long since familiar to her. Nikolai Vasilievich's room greeted her with a rich aroma of incense, emanating from a new diffuser, an elegant, matte silver device mounted in the corner on a special stand. Woodish clouds floated in the sunlight streaming from beneath the heavy curtain, creating the feeling of a church's twilight. Antonina automatically noted that the smell was pleasant, relaxing, probably truly beneficial for the respiratory tract. Her father-in-law lay on a high hospital bed, thin and motionless, with sharp cheekbones and sunken cheeks. His hands were stretched out on top of the blanket, his fingers waxed, his nails neatly trimmed. She trimmed them herself every week. All that remained of the former lieutenant colonel, whose photographs in dress uniform and awards hung in the 1st-floor living room, was this shell. which she had kept in working order for 3,000 days, never allowing the life that flickered within to fade. "Good morning, Nikolai Vasilievich," she said, out of habit developed over years of care. She still couldn't force herself to remain silent around him, even though the doctors said he couldn't hear or understand anything. Vadim and Maya had left. To Crimea, to Artek, can you imagine? Some kind of ecological shift. Meika was happy, although she didn't show it, of course. "You know our teenagers, the whole world is for them." "It's a phone." My father-in-law didn't answer. He never answered. The monitors showed a stable pulse of 75 beats per minute, blood pressure within normal limits, and oxygen saturation at 96%. Antonina began the standard airway management procedure with familiar movements, checking the catheters, sensors, and tube connections, which over the years she had become more familiar with than her own face in the mirror. She didn't immediately notice the tension in his jaw muscles. It was a subtle movement, like a spasm or tic, the kind that sometimes occur in comatose patients without any conscious effort. But in 17 years of working as a rehabilitation physician, she'd learned to notice such subtleties, to distinguish reflex from intention. The monitor beeped alarmingly. His pulse jumped to 80. "Nikolai Vasilievich?" She leaned over him, checking his pupillary response. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, not reflexively, not vacantly. As sometimes happens with comatose patients, when their gaze glides through you, fixating on nothing, they opened deliberately, with effort, as if you were emerging from deep water. His cloudy gaze darted from her face to the diffuser in the corner, from which whitish smoke continued to ooze, then back to her. There was something in that gaze, despair, fear, pleading, that took Antonina's breath away. Hoarse, gurgling sounds escaped her father-in-law's throat, as if he were trying to speak for the first time after a long illness. His lips began to move, struggling to form words, his face contorted with tension. "In this device," he croaked, each sound coming with visible, painful effort. "Poison. Vadim is killing me." 7 words. Antonina recoiled from the bed, her elbow catching the medicine cart, and it rolled back against the wall with a crash, spilling syringes and vials of saline solution onto the floor. The white mist from the diffuser continued to swirl in the corner of the room, and now this peaceful incense smoke that she had been inhaling for the last half hour seemed to her like the breath of something terrible, invisible, deadly, penetrating the lungs with each breath and settling there as a poisonous film. She ran out of the room, not paying attention to where she was going, tumbled down the stairs, nearly falling on the turn and hitting her shoulder painfully on the railing, and yanked open the heavy front door, which didn't give way immediately, and flew out onto the porch. On a scorching July afternoon, the heat hit her face, the hot air burned her throat, but she still swallowed it greedily, convulsively, as if trying to clear her lungs of that white fog that a minute ago had seemed harmless and even pleasant. A driveway with dark gray gravel, a lawn with automatic sprinklers, wrought iron gates, beyond which the empty street of the village was visible. She could walk out these gates now and drive away, call a taxi, and be in the city, among people, safe in about 20 minutes. But then Nikolai Vasilievich would remain up there, alone with the poisoned air, in a room where every breath brought him closer to death. And when Vadim returns from Crimea, Antonina forced herself to breathe slowly, counting her inhalations and exhalations, as she'd been taught in stress management courses. 17 years of medical practice, nearly 4,000 days of living alongside others' pain and helplessness, dozens of emergency situations where she needed to act rather than panic. All of this had taught her to cope with even greater challenges. Smoothing her disheveled hair, straightening her robe, she took a deep breath and returned to the house. The first thing she did was unplug the diffuser. The green light flickered and went out. The white mist began to dissipate, melting into the stuffy air of the room. In the bathroom, she began pouring the liquid from the reservoir into the sink, but stopped just in time when her professional instincts overcame her panic. You can't destroy evidence if you want to prove something. She found a sterile sample collection container in the cabinet, poured the remaining oily solution into it, and held it up to the light. Under the sweet incense, the liquid looked suspicious. A cloudy sediment coated the walls, an oily film on the surface. She'd seen a similar picture at her toxicology class at the institute, when they were studying heavy metal compounds. Her hands were shaking as she screwed the lid on the container and put it in her lab coat pocket. Then she methodically searched everything, room by room, including her father-in-law's room, peering into every corner, checking every shelf and every decorative item. She found the first camera among the decorative photo frames on a bookshelf. Its tiny lens cleverly disguised as a mounting screw, aimed directly at the patient's bed. She discovered the second in the ventilation grate above the door, which offered a view of the entire room. Vadim watched. From his Crimean home, probably sipping a cocktail by the pool, he periodically checked the security footage, watching his paralyzed father slowly fade away from the poisoned air, and his wife, unsuspecting, caring for him while inhaling the same poison. Antonina forced herself to smile for the camera, picked up the diffuser reservoir, twirled it in her hands, and accidentally dropped it on the floor, right into a puddle left by an overturned vase. The device began to smoke. A scorched plastic smell came from the crack, and she let out a loud, theatrical gasp. "Oh my God, Vadim's going to kill me." This thing cost 45,000 rubles. From the storage room at the end of the hall, she pulled out an old humidifier, the one they used before the new thing came along, and replaced it with the expensive toy. A clumsy, careless wife who stupidly broke an expensive device and now had to worry about her husband's anger. This was the image she wanted to create for those watching her through the hidden cameras. After she'd played her part convincingly, she went down to the utility closet on the ground floor, where a Wi-Fi router blinked behind the door of a gray metal cabinet. Antonina took a roll of foil from the kitchen and wrapped the antenna in several loose layers. Not tight enough to completely cut off the connection. That would trigger an immediate alarm, but loose enough to create intermittent interference. The image will freeze, pixelate, and disappear for a few minutes. A common technical glitch in hot weather when the equipment overheats. Nothing suspicious. She had time to return to her father-in-law's bedside, take his hand, and be lost in thought about whether he was truly conscious, or if those 7 words were the last glimmer of his fading mind. When her phone vibrated, her beloved appeared on the screen with a video call icon, and Antonina, quickly adjusting her hair and assuming a look of guilty confusion, pressed the answer button. "Hi, honey," Vadim said, and behind him, beige chairs and wood paneling, reminiscent of an airport business lounge, were visible. "How's Dad?" "Everything's fine. Stable. All my vitals are normal. Listen, I'm so awkward, can you imagine?" She made a guilty face. "I broke your diffuser. I accidentally dropped it, water got inside, and it started smoking. That's how I broke it." A flash of irritation, quick and sharp, flashed in my husband's voice, but he immediately pulled himself together, returning to his caring, husbandly demeanor. "Okay, no big deal. It happens. Just use a regular humidifier for now. I'll order a new one when we get back. I've already put on, don't worry." "Where are you now?" "In Roshino. We're waiting for a flight to Simferopol. We board in an hour. Maya, come here. Mom wants to see you." Maya appeared in the frame wearing a thick hooded sweater pulled almost to her eyebrows. Her hands were tucked into her pockets, her gaze directed somewhere past the camera. "Hi, Mom," she muttered, not looking at the lens. "The air conditioning in this room is terrible. I'm frozen solid. I can barely stand it." "Dress warmly on the plane," Antonina said, her voice barely wavering, even though everything inside her was clenching into a tight knot, because she had already seen what she shouldn't have. In the reflection of Vadim's expensive sunglasses, which for some reason he hadn't taken off even indoors, palm trees, sun loungers, and the blue water of the pool, bathed in bright sunlight, were clearly visible. It wasn't the Timian airport interior at all. A grove with its gray walls and dim lighting, and on the coffee table behind Maya sat a glass jar with a bright label that Antonina would recognize in 1,000. Feijoa jam, a shop in the Krasnodar region, Sochi, a local delicacy sold only in Krasnaya Polyana and in Sochi's tourist shops. They weren't in Crimea, but in Sochi, a few hours' flight from Tyumen, not on the other side of the country. And Maya, her daughter, her little girl, who she carried for 9 months and breastfed until she was 18 months old, was lying to her face, obediently following her father's commands, feigning cold in the scorching Sochi afternoon. "Have a good rest," Antonina said, trying not to give herself away, and hung up. That night, after midnight, when the house was plunged into a resounding silence, broken only by the hum of the air conditioners and the beeping of the medical monitors upstairs, she crept down the dark hallway to Vadim's office. This room had always been off limits for her. "Trade secrets, company documents, don't pry, Tanya. You'll never understand anything about the oil and gas business anyway." The electronic lock blinked red, waiting for the code, and Antonina, after a moment's hesitation, typed in the date of their first meeting. the very day her husband called his greatest conquest in life. The lock clicked, and the door swung silently open. In the office, she first turned off the power on the floor by unscrewing the fuses in the fuse box. If there were hidden cameras here too, they shouldn't be working. Shouldn't be transmitting images to her husband's phone, who was probably sleeping in some department store in Sochi next to their daughter. The dim beam of the flashlight revealed a massive mahogany desk, bookshelves filled with expensive editions, and a leather chair in which Vadim made important decisions beyond her comprehension. Under the chair, in a crack between the leg and the carpet, she felt a small brass key, and it fit perfectly into what looked like a thick leather-bound volume on the third shelf, a piece of Russian Art Nouveau architecture. The book turned out to be a safe with a velvet lining. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, an IOU for 25 million rubles. The creditors were listed as individual entrepreneur KV Tyumentsev, but Antonina knew that name. It was whispered around town when they talked about the people controlling the shadowy money-lending industry, people best avoided, and debts best repaid on time. The repayment period is in 3 days. A map of a plot of land in the village of Patarina, 40 kilometers from the city, 8 hectares, owned by Nikolai Vasilievich since Soviet times, through which, judging by the pencil marks in the margins, a new federal gas pipeline was supposed to be built. The proposed compensation amount, written in the husband's handwriting with his distinctive flourishes, was 120 million rubles. A will, dated last month, declared the paralyzed father-in-law competent through the testimony of some pocket notary and left all his property to his son, Vadim. But Antonina knew Nikolai Vasilievich's handwriting well from old postcards he'd sent them for New Year's before his illness. And this signature was someone else's, clumsily imitated, scrawled in someone's uncertain hand. And the resuscitation refusal form had her own signature, which she'd never put on it. At the very bottom of the safe, under the papers, lay a digital voice recorder. Antonina pressed the play button, and her husband's voice rang out in the silence of the darkened office. Calm, businesslike, measured as if he were discussing a quarterly report or equipment deliveries. 72 hours. And it will look like natural death from respiratory failure. Thallium salts in aerosol form act gradually, affecting the nervous system, with no sudden symptoms or suspicious signs. When I return from Crimea, I'll simply play the grieving son, heartbroken. And what about your wife? Asked an unfamiliar male voice, slightly hoarse. Who would perform an autopsy on a bedridden patient who's been in a coma for 8 years? Vadim chuckled. She'll tell the local police officer about his gradual decline and show him his medical records. She's a doctor. She's cared for him for years. No one will question her competence. They'll chalk it all up to natural causes. Antonina paused the recording, feeling a chill creep through her body despite the stifling July night. My fingers moved automatically, like in an operating room, when there's no time to think and every second counts. Copy the file to the flash drive from the desk drawer, wipe the fingerprints off the recorder with a napkin, return everything to its original place, close the safe, put the key under the chair, leave the office, turn on the electricity on the floor. Leaning against the wall in the dark hallway, she closed her eyes and tried to collect her thoughts. Vadim has connections in the police and the prosecutor's office. The oil and gas business opens many doors and closes many eyes. If she goes to the investigators with this recording, her husband will find out about it before the first report is compiled. And then there will be documents proving her insanity, witness testimony about her strange behavior, and the conclusions of pocket psychiatrists about paranoid disorder due to overwork. We need to catch him red-handed. We need him to confess in front of witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated. Antonina opened her eyes and looked into the darkness of the hallway, where the fire alarm flickered faintly. She had 72 hours, the same 72 hours Vadim had set aside for his own father's death. She didn't sleep that night, sitting by the living room window until dawn. As the sky over the village of Komarovo began to gray and the first birds began to flutter in the crowns of the linden trees along the fence, the doorbell made her jump. A stocky man wearing gold-rimmed glasses stood in the doorway, carrying a leather satchel and a look of professional sympathy on his round face. Before Antonina could even get a good look at him, she recognized his voice, the same hoarse voice that had discussed the poison dosage with Vadim on the recording. Albert Robertovich Schneider, he introduced himself, handing over a gold-embossed business card. The Tkachev family's personal physician. Vadim Nikolaevich asked me to stop by and check on my father. Yes, of course, come in. Antonina feigned relief she didn't feel and stepped aside, letting him into the hallway. I'm so glad you came. I've been completely worn out here alone. While Schneider was taking off his light jacket and putting on shoe covers, she went upstairs and leaned over her father-in-law, whispering the situation. Nikolai Vasilievich, there's a bad guy in the house, a friend of Adam's. Pretend to be asleep, don't open your eyes, no matter what he does. The old man's eyelids twitched in understanding. Antonina quickly poured herbal infusion of valerian and chamomile, prepared the night before, into his mouth through an umbrella. It was a harmless remedy, but sufficient to slow his pulse and create the appearance of deterioration. Schneider entered the room with the air of a master inspecting his domain, took a stethoscope from his bag, and began listening to the patient's chest, frowning and shaking his head with that exaggerated concern doctors show the relatives of hopeless patients. A significant deterioration, he stated, writing something down in his notebook. Congestion in the lungs, a slow pulse, and overall negative dynamics. I'm afraid, Antonina Sergeyevna, we need to be prepared for the worst. Oh, my God! She pressed her hands to her chest. And Vadim had been so hopeful about that diffuser. A diffuser. Schneider froze for a moment, but then pulled himself together. Ah, yes, a wonderful device. Too bad it broke. But I brought something better. He took a dark, unlabeled bottle from his bag and placed it on the nightstand next to the bed. A highly effective German supplement, the latest development from a Munich clinic. 5 drops through an umbrella every evening. This will support cardiac function. Thank you so much. Antonina took the bottle and twirled it in her hands, feigning gratitude. Vadim cares so much for his father, he even sends medication from Crimea. After Schneider left, she locked herself in the storage room, where an old microscope and a set of reagents for simple tests had been stored since her correspondence course days. A few drops from a bottle onto a glass slide. A few manipulations, and the result left her cold. Digoxin, in high concentration, a cardiac glycoside, which at such a dose would cause cardiac arrest within a few days. The plan was devilishly clever. If her mother-in-law died, she would be to blame. She was the one who administered the medicine through the umbrella, and the unlabeled bottle would either disappear, or Schneider would testify under oath that he was giving her ordinary vitamins. Antonina poured the poison down the sink, saving a small sample in the freezer among bags of frozen vegetables, and filled the bottle with sweetened water. That evening, standing in front of a camera in the corner of the room, she demonstratively administered medication to her father-in-law, saying loudly enough for the microphone to pick up every word. Look, Dad, Vadim takes such good care of you. He even sent a German remedy from Crimea. You'll feel better now. At 2 in the morning, she let her hair down, put on a white nightgown, and walked barefoot from the bedroom. Her eyes were wide, her lips whispering meaningless words, the image of a sleepwalker seen in dozens of films and medical textbooks. She went down to the kitchen, stood for a long time in front of the open refrigerator, then went up to the living room and froze in front of the portrait of her late mother-in-law, which hung above the fireplace in a heavy bronze frame. The phone vibrated after 15 minutes. It's you, darling, on the screen. Tanya. Vadim's voice sounded worried. What are you doing? I see you on the cameras. Are you okay? Huh? She answered sleepily, confused, rubbing her eyes. Vadim, what time is it? 2 in the morning. You were walking around the house, talking to yourself. Oh my God, Antonina sobbed, and tears streamed down her cheeks without any pretense, because over these 2 days she had accumulated enough grief for 100 such scenes. I have nightmares, Vadim. Your mom? She says there's someone in the house and that I need to run. I'm probably sleepwalking from stress. Tanya, honey, calm down. His voice took on a condescending tone, the kind used with cranky children or the mentally ill. It's just nerves. Get some sleeping pills from the first aid kit and lie down. I'll be back soon. Everything will be fine. Are you really going to be back soon? She asked plaintively, and heard him breathe a sigh of relief on the other end of the line. The husband completely bought the image of a harried, superstitious woman on the verge of a breakdown. The next morning, waiting for the connection with the cameras to be lost due to yet another signal failure, Antonina rolled a bulky verticalizer into the room, a device for lifting bedridden patients that created a perfect blind spot between the bed and the lens. In those precious moments of lost connection, she performed pain therapy, pressing on the sensitive spots between her father-in-law's fingers, causing a sharp pain to awaken dormant nerves. Forgive me, Nikolai Vasilievich, she whispered, watching his face contort in pain. I know it hurts, but I need you to be able to at least move a finger. One finger is all we need. After an hour of excruciating work, the index finger of his right hand twitched. A tiny movement, barely noticeable. But for Antonina, it was worth more than gold. While changing the bed linens, she noticed her father-in-law's gaze shifting several times to the corner of the mattress, where the fabric on the mattress pad was slightly bulging. In the gap between the mattress and the bed frame, she felt something hard and rectangular. An old Nokia phone, one of those that holds a charge for weeks and works even after falling from the 5th floor. The phone turned on. In the drafts folder was an unsent message dated March 12, 2017, the day Nikolai Vasilievich had a stroke. Grisha, help! Vadim is poisoning me. He wants land. Antonina sank onto the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. Nikolai Vasilievich had known about his son's betrayal back then, 8 years ago. The Spanish moral tea that bought him so carefully prepared for his father every morning was poisoned. The father-in-law tried to call for help from an old army friend, a comrade from Afghanistan, but paralysis overtook him faster than his stiff fingers could press the send button. At 8 years old, he lay fully conscious, trapped in his own body, hearing his son's every word, seeing every lie, and unable to even blink in protest. I'll find Grigory Matvievich, she whispered, squeezing her father-in-law's hand. I promise. Seeing the call from Maya caught her off guard. Usually, the daughter avoided communicating with her mother, preferring short messages on Messenger. Hi, Mom, Maya said, her voice carrying the same condescending tone Antonina knew so well from her conversations with Vadim. Did you take your meds today? What meds, Maya? Well, the ones Dad left you. For anxiety. Antonina felt a chill spread through her chest. Darling, what makes you think I need anxiety medication? Mom, that's enough. Maya rolled her eyes with that teenage superiority so easily picked up from adults. Dad explained everything to me. He says you've been forgetful lately, that you're paranoid from the stress of Grandpa. He's really worried about you, Mom. He says you sometimes say strange things and don't remember them. How long has Dad been telling you this? About a year, probably. He asked me to keep an eye on you, to let him know if you were acting strange. Mom, don't be offended, but Dad, he's a hero. He carries so much on his shoulders, the company, Grandpa, and you too. You just need to take your pills and rest, and everything will be fine. Antonina looked at her daughter's face on the screen, the familiar features, her eyes, her chin, and saw Vidim's reflection in them. His manner of speaking, his intonation, his lies. A year. For a whole year, he methodically convinced Maya that her mother was mentally unstable. He created an ideal picture. Dad the hero, bearing the family's burden. Mom the sick woman, prone to delusional ideas. Any accusations from Antonina would now be perceived as a symptom of illness, as another psychotic episode. You're right, dear, she said, though each word was difficult. I'll take my pills. Rest, kisses. That night, when the house had quieted down and the cameras had started malfunctioning again, Antonina opened the Rosa Kuder ski resort website on her old laptop and began scrolling through the geotagged photos. After an hour of searching, she found what she was looking for. A photo of a young woman in a swimsuit by the pool, against a backdrop of mountains and palm trees. The silhouette of a man with a camera was visible in the reflection of the glass door, and in the background, a Mayan woman playing in the water. The caption read, "The perfect family vacation. Thank you to my wonderful boss for spoiling us." Emma Lvovna Savitskaya, CFO of the company Muzha. Antonina had seen her several times at corporate events, tall, well-groomed, with the self-assured confidence that comes with money and status. Now this woman was openly rehearsing the role of a future housewife, posting photos with someone else's husband and someone else's daughter. Antonina saved the screenshots and closed the laptop. She felt no jealousy. That feeling had long since burned out, leaving only ashes. The picture was complete. Vadim had planned to kill his father, frame his wife, and start a new life with his mistress using the 120 million rubles in compensation for his father's land. She spent the next 24 hours gathering evidence with the meticulous care of a forensic expert. A lock of hair from the back of my father-in-law's head, the hair follicles retaining traces of toxins for years, is sealed in a plastic bag and hidden in the stuffing of an old teddy bear on a shelf. Urine samples from the catheter bag are poured into test tubes, wrapped in foil, and stored in the freezer next to the venom samples from the diffuser and the Schneider vial. The sedatives Vadim forced her to take before his departure were flushed down the toilet and replaced with similarly shaped vitamins. That evening, She swallowed them in front of the camera, then feigned drowsiness, letting her husband think his medications were working. Using an old Nokia phone, inserting a SIM card she'd bought with cash, she sent 2 messages. First, to Albert Schneider. The investigative committee is reopening the investigation into Kakachov Sr.'s case. Medical records are being seized. Cover your tracks. Second, to Vadim's company office. The tax authorities are launching an unscheduled audit. They're looking for illegal withdrawals of funds. They're arriving tomorrow. After leaving, she broke the SIM card in half and flushed it down the toilet. People with secrets are easily frightened. Vague threats will sow paranoia. Vadim will suspect competitors or one of his creditors. Schneider will fear being set up. Their alliance will begin to crumble, and most importantly, they will speed up the plan. Instead of waiting the remaining hours, they will want to eliminate Nikolai Vasilievich immediately. The reaction came faster than she expected. Standing by the living room window, Antonina saw a gray Mercedes screech to a halt at the wrought iron gates. She recognized Schneider's car by the gold rims he'd shown her during his first visit. The doctor got out, took a few steps toward the gates, stopped, glanced around with the hunted air of a man expecting an ambush from every bush, and returned to the car. The Mercedes turned around and sped away, leaving behind only a cloud of dust on the hot asphalt. That evening, the lights in the house flickered. The router beeped a long time and died, plunging the rooms into digital silence. Antonina walked to the second-floor window and saw what she'd been waiting for. 50 meters from the gate, in the deepening July twilight, sat a familiar black Lexus, its engine running. Vadim returned not from Crimea, not from Sochi, but from somewhere very close by, where he had been hiding all these days, watching the house and waiting for the moment for the final blow. "Nikolai Vasilievich," she whispered, leaning over her father-in-law, "he's here. Now everything will be decided." The old man blinked slowly, and his trembling finger clasped her little finger. A silent pact of absolute trust between two people who, by fate, found themselves on opposite sides of the same bed, but on the same side of the barricade. Antonina worked quickly. She pulled out a CPR training dummy from under the bed, which she'd kept since her professional training days, hooked it up to the monitor, and covered it with a blanket on the far side of the bed, away from the dim white of the nightlight. Then she clamped her father-in-law's IV line for a few minutes to induce a mild physiological reaction. Dry skin, chapped lips, and misaligned the ECG electrodes. The monitor screeched, and a chaotic waveform resembling ventricular fibrillation danced across the screen. She dialed her husband's number, and when he answered, a heartbreaking cry escaped her throat. "Vadim, Daddy's not feeling well. He's turning blue. The monitor is screeching. I don't know what to do. I need to call an ambulance." "No." His voice sounded too fast, too harsh. "Don't call an ambulance. By the time the ambulance gets here from Tyumen, it will be too late. I'm bringing a special remedy from a healer in the Altai Mountains not far from home. 1 injection and the condition will stabilize. Hang in there, Tanya. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Antonina hung up and grinned. His medicine was a one-way ticket for her father-in-law, and he was afraid of real doctors who would recognize the signs of poisoning. She removed the catheter clamp, gave Nikolai Vasilievich a resuscitation solution, and sat down to wait. Vadim burst into the room 12 minutes later, disheveled, sweating, his expensive shirt clinging to his back. He fell to his knees by the bed, grabbed his father's hand, cooled with an ice pack, and burst into tears. "Dad, I'm a terrible son. Don't go!" "I'm here, Dad. I'm with you." Antonina watched from the corner, covering her face with her hands and feigning despair. But through her fingers, she saw his gaze dart to the monitor with a chaotic curve, and his lips twitch in a fleeting triumph that he immediately extinguished. "Tanya, bring water and towels," he commanded without turning around. "Faster." She stepped out into the hallway but stopped at the doorway, hidden in shadow. Vadim, thinking he was alone, pulled a metal case from his pocket, flipped the lid, and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. His movements were frighteningly professional. He tapped the syringe to remove any air bubbles, checked the plunger, and leaned toward his father's ear. "Go away quietly, Dad," he whispered, and there was no pretense in his voice, only cold calculation. "You've had enough. The company is in trouble, and the Timene guys won't wait. They'll break my arms and legs. This land will save us all. If you love me, do this last for the family." As the needle approached the vein in the crook of her elbow, Antonina lunged forward. Her left hand grabbed her husband's wrist. Her thumb dug into the painful spot between the tendons. It was a technique for subduing unruly patients, something she'd been taught in training. And Vadim cried out in surprise and pain. The syringe fell, the needle crunching on the floor. What did you want to kill him with, Vadim? She twisted his wrist harder. To continue what you left unfinished 8 years ago. Tanya, you're crazy. He tried to break free, but she held on tight. It's a pacemaker. Let me go. Instead of answering, she tore the blanket off the mannequin, revealing a plastic torso hooked up to a monitor. Here's the source of your dying heart. Now look at the real readings. She reconnected the electrodes to her father-in-law's chest, and the screen showed a healthy rhythm. 85 beats, blood pressure, 120/80. Vadim stared at the monitor in horror, trying to comprehend how his perfect plan had crumbled to dust. And then the last thing he expected happened. Nikolai Vasilievich opened his eyes, not dull, not empty, but sharp, blazing with anger. 8 years of imprisonment in his own body. He slowly raised his hand, pushed the bandage from his forehead, and, leaning on his elbows, sat up in bed with great effort. Dad. Vadim looked at his father as if he were looking at a ghost risen from the grave. You're in a coma. Nikolai Vasilievich gathered his strength for a long time, his dry lips moving, pushing out words, each one a struggle. I no longer have a son. It wasn't a curse in anger, not a cry of despair, but a declaration of renunciation, calm and final. 8 years ago you tried to kill me. The old man continued, his voice hoarse from the long silence gaining strength. The Spanish brew was poisoned. I knew everything. I lay there, hearing your every word, seeing your every lie. I've already drawn up a new will. You won't get a penny. The land will go to a veterans fund. Vadim sank to the floor, and the word will hit him harder than any fist. His main motive, the money for which he was willing to kill his own father, evaporated. He wasn't just broke. He was a failed killer with a $25 million debt to people who don't forgive delays. In the distance, on the access road to the village, the wail of police sirens could be heard. I called the police station 20 minutes ago, Antonina said, showing him her phone screen with the active call. They heard every word you said. The investigator entered the room, accompanied by 2 operatives, and Vadim immediately tried to shift the blame. She's crazy. She's setting me up. I gave my father a pacemaker. She made it all up. But Nikolai Vasilievich raised a trembling hand and pointed at his son. It's him. He's been poisoning me for 8 years. He came today to finish. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped onto Vadim's wrists, and Antonina handed the investigator a flash drive with recordings, a bottle of Schneider's Digoxin, and a broken one. Tonya, Vadim called as they led him to the exit. Tonya, listen. I can explain everything. She looked at him one last time, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with a kind of devastated pity for the man who had ruined his own life for money he would now never get. You didn't lose to me, Vadim. You lost to yourself. 3 months later, Antonina wheeled Nikolai Vasilievich into the courtroom of the Kalininsky District Court in Tyumen in a wheelchair. He had partially regained his mobility after intensive rehabilitation, and he insisted on attending, despite doctors' advice to conserve his strength. Vadim stood in the dock, exhausted, pale in his official uniform, unable to look up at his father or ex-wife. Sitting nearby on separate benches were Schneider, arrested while attempting to destroy records of illegal drug purchases, and Emma Savitskaya, detained at the Sochi airport with the company's money. But the main tragedy of the day was May. She sat in the hall, her eyes puffy from crying. And Antonina knew these tears had been flowing for 3 days, ever since she showed her daughter the hidden camera footage from Vadim's office. In the video, he was laughing with Emma. Meka, naive, believed everything. I told her mother was going crazy and she completely believed it. She's my trump card to keep Tanya in check. Defendant Vadim Nikolaevich Tkachev is found guilty under a combination of Articles 30, Part 3, 15, Part 2, and 159, Part 4 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. The judge's voice carried throughout the courtroom. And is sentenced to 18 years in a maximum security penal colony. Maya burst into tears, covering her face with her hands, and Antonina hugged her shoulders, feeling her thin body shake with sobs. Nikolai Vasilievich sat motionless, tears streaming down his face, but he kept his eyes on his son, who was being led away by the guards. Watching your child being led to prison was the greatest tragedy. even if that child tried to kill you. It's okay to cry, Antonina whispered to her daughter as they walked out of the courthouse into the autumn sun. Cry it out today. Tomorrow we'll start all over again. She sold the cottage in Komarova a month later. Too many dark memories had been absorbed into its walls, too many cameras lurked in its corners. With the proceeds, she bought a spacious apartment in a new residential complex in Tyumen, with a large west-facing loggia where the setting sun bathed the rooms in golden light. Nikolai Vasilievich was the first to inhabit this loggia, arranging pots of seedlings, constructing shelves from old boards for boxes of soil, and now every evening he tended to his tomatoes and greens, conversing with the plants the same way Antonina had once conversed with him while he lay in a coma. His speech returned slowly, but he could already utter complete sentences, and his right hand had strengthened enough that he could hold a watering can himself. Antonina returned to the regional hospital and, 6 months later, became head of the rehabilitation department. In the evenings, she prepared for her correspondence law degree, because she wanted to combine medicine and law to protect those who cannot protect themselves, the elderly, who are abused by their own children, wives, trapped in domestic violence. All those the system had become accustomed to ignoring. Maya had changed the most. The spoiled daddy's girl had vanished, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful girl who now changed her grandfather's bedsheets herself, read newspapers aloud to him, and was determined to study psychology. I want to help people. Mom, she said one day as they washed the dishes together after dinner, like us, who are deceived by those closest to us. One day, a letter arrived from the penal colony. Antonina recognized the return address right away, even though the sender's name was written in official handwriting. She stared at the envelope for a long time, holding it in her hands, and felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no curiosity. She wasn't interested in what was inside, whether it was apologies or curses, pleas for forgiveness or accusations of betrayal. This chapter of her life was over, and she had no intention of rereading it. The letter flew into the trash can unopened. The August evening descended on the city in a soft twilight, and Antonina stood in the doorway of the loggia, watching Nikolai Vasilievich and Maya watering the tomatoes together. Her grandfather explained something to his granddaughter, pointing at the leaves. She laughed in response, and their voices mingled with the noise of the city below, with the honking of cars and distant music from the open windows. The setting sun cast a golden light on the old man's gray hair and the girl's chestnut locks. In this light, they seemed like characters in some other story, not the one that began with a poisoned diffuser and the 7 words of a dying man, but a completely new one that was just beginning. Antonina smiled, inhaling the scent of ripe tomatoes and warm earth. True happiness wasn't found in luxury cottages or in million-dollar gas pipeline compensation. It was here, in the quiet peace of mind and the laughter of those who remained close.